Well, hello. Welcome to week 5 of our Introduction to Ghost Studies. This week we will be discussing spiritualism, and in particular the ghosts in ancient, classical, and the pre-modern eras. I don't know if I said eras. It may be daunting and seemingly unfair given the time constraints to go over so much history concerning ghosts, but I would like to move through the various eras that express different views of ghosts. So I would like to go over them briefly in this section. I don't want to, because this is not an historical course, this is a course on ghosts themselves and various theories on ghosts and what ghosts are and all that sort of thing. But this evolutionary tapestry of perspectives on ghosts reveal a consistent picture of the heaviness or gravity of death. So death is heavy. It's like a barbell. It's very heavy. It's not light and airy like clouds, birds of the air. It's very heavy. It's not light at all. And that's one thing that all of the different perspectives agree on, is that that death is a condition or a situation that things undergo that make them heavy. And hence the word grave. That's where the word grave comes from. Things are heavy. Things are grave. The term grave. The main distinction we come to, and when assessing these perspectives on ghosts and death, is a static or a developing afterlife. So in the afterlife, the ghost is either in one place or another, or it's constantly evolving into some ethereal whatever state of being. So we have two different perspectives. We have one which is static, which is once the individual dies and the soul moves on, it's going to be in one place or another, or maybe they all go to one place, maybe they go to either, of course, the traditional religious perspective, heaven or hell, or after death they continuously evolve and change and develop. So those are the two main perspectives you have in ancient and classical versions of what ghosts are. As to the former, the static afterlife is one where the soul has usually one of two distinct destinations, as we were saying. Typically, it's either, heaven or hell. So you got either heaven or hell in the static perspective. Concerning the latter, developing or changing and evolving afterlife, not the static, but the changing or constant, where they're, it's moving from one state, this one state where the soul has this type of knowledge and is of this sort of character, and it keeps changing until it develops into what it was meant to develop into. It's no longer tarnished or hindered. It has come to complete enlightenment. It has come to complete release. It has come to complete righteousness. So it develops from something bad to something good. The evolving afterlives are where the conditions are not static but vary by degrees and change based on the level of enlightenment, betterment, and inner development. So with the development perspective, you have this level of enlightenment that you're trying to achieve. And it's an enlightenment, it's betterment, it's almost becoming like a god, I guess. And there's an inner development. The character of that soul, that individual, is made better. They're no longer crotchety old man that just yells at people or just has a very negative perspective. It has a very positive perspective, so it changes. One thing that both views agree on, though, is the presence of a ghost was not a good or pleasant or normative thing. So, regardless of whether the culture believed, that this thing was supposed to be either in heaven or hell, or it was supposed to be developing into something good or perfect. The fact is, if you saw a ghost, it was not a good thing. It was not a positive, nor normative. It wasn't something that would normally happen. If you saw it, it was a bad omen. It was suggestive of something that was wrong. There was something, of course, you've heard this story, the unfinished business idea and all that stuff. So an example of this is Samhain, or Halloween. And during Halloween, you have the spirits of the dead. They come back. They come back from the grave. There's the grave, and they come out of their graves to haunt the living. This was considered a scary or bad thing. The people of the villages would have bonfires, and they would try to ward off the evil spirits with whatever sorts of things that they would do. So they would try to keep them at bay. And of course, that's why children would go around from house to house, and they would dress up like ghosts or evil spirits. And these people couldn't tell the difference between whether they were actual beings or whether they were people kids dressed up ghosts. So they would give them treats. But ultimately, during that period, the period between the dark half and the light half of the year, the dark half, this dark half and light half. This veneer between the living and the dead was the thinnest, and was a perfect or ideal time for one to see a ghost or one to see the dead, because that veil between the living and the dead was very thin. It was not considered a good thing to see that. Not that they are bad, but that they are harsh, grave, and so now that's an important thing to recognize, is that, like the barbell, it's heavy, it's heavy, but it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's very grave. It's very burdensome. It's harsh. Harsh is not necessarily bad. A tornado is harsh. A hurricane's harsh. Let's consider something like an elephant and the mouse. Okay, we have an elephant. God, this is going to be terrible. Never drawn an elephant. I can't draw one. Okay, there's an elephant. And here's a little squeaky mouse. I can't draw this. Anyway, you have a small thing with a very thin, fragile, skeletal frame, and this thing, which is very heavy, very strong skeletal frame, has very thick skin. If I were to take a hammer and I were to hit the elephant, it probably wouldn't feel it that much. It might notice something like touching you. If I were to do it to the mouse, it would kill it. I mean, it would just completely smash it. So there's a huge difference between an elephant and a mouse in terms of what sorts of things it can take. Well, this is the same way as this distinction between the living and the dead. The living are fragile. The dead are heavy. The dead are like the elephant. Once they die, the soul is embodied with some sort of body, or however you want to, or it's in a condition or a state in which it's heavy and it's harsh, and it can't be harmed by anything like a hammer. The living, though, is like the mouse. It's very fragile. Our skin's very fragile. Our bone structure very fragile, very easily to hurt. So the afterlife would be quite comfortable to an elephant. It would be devastating to a mouse, but it would be quite comfortable for an elephant or a ghost. I mean, comparatively. The point is that for the living, if the living human person with a human body were to enter into the realm of the afterlife or whatever, it would just be devastating. It'd be horrifying. It'd be scary. It'd be terrifying. It'd just be terrible. To a ghost, it's not that bad. Pretty nice. It's an environment that it can sustain and that it feels comfortable in. So the term grave just refers to its heaviness. It's much more durable and much more equipped to deal with an afterlife than we are. And that's why if we ever do experience the afterlife, if we're reflecting on it, we experience a ghost, for example, or we experience any type of OBE, out-of-body experience, and you actually go through an afterlife, it seems really intense. And the reason why it's intense is because our frail bodies, our frail psyches are just not prepared for what lies beneath. And this is much like the harshness of God in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, we always hear about how God smite entire groups of people and this and that. Well, it's kind of like a hurricane. A hurricane doesn't care; it just comes through and just kills lots of people. Same way with a tornado or any type of natural disaster. It's just we're not equipped to be able to handle that sort of power. Well, I mean, we could look. I'm not here to argue that the Old Testament God is good or evil. I'm not here to do that. I'm just using it as an example. And we could look at it as the Old Testament God was one that would be like that, would be heavy in contrast to a typical human civilization, because we are situated, or we are comprised of primarily fragile material. And when we come in contact with something or someone that is much more durable, much more harsh, much more grave, then it's going to seem negative to us from our perspective. Even though it's not negative, it's just from our perspective it is. So the sturdy and the fragile, the strong and the weak, what Paul called the corruptible taking on the incorruptible. So the incorruptible, which is that's corruptible, it can die, it can fall off a cliff, blah, blah, blah. Here's the incorrupt. You can't corrupt a ghost. You cannot hurt a ghost. It's incorruptible. The soul itself, once embodied in whatever material is outside of this life, is much more durable, much more sturdy and firm than the fragility and the lightness and the airiness of the human flesh. So now another thing to consider concerning the static view is the idea that the soul is either in heaven or hell. Therefore, it cannot be in a specific place after death. We will go over this a little bit more in week 7, though. I'm not going to really go into that per se. But this would explain the corporeal or physical return of corpses according to legend. So what this means is if you have a static perspective on the soul after death, well, once the soul goes, once it goes out of the body, it has to be somewhere. It has to be in heaven, or it has to be in hell, or maybe some intermediary place like purgatory. But it has to be one of those places. It can't be on the earth. It can't be there. So if you do see a ghost, or if you see a body that has come back to life, necessarily it has to be by something other than a human soul. Well, if it's not by a human soul, then what could it be? Well, the big D word, a demon, or some sort of inhuman spirit that influences, that exists within the spaces of this realm, of this physical reality. It exists within those spaces, unlike the static human soul, which must either go to one of these places. So the only things that can be in these spaces would be a demon. In the Bible, I think it says something about how Satan is the prince, or Lucifer, the devil, however you want to interpret it, is is the prince of the air. Well, the prince of the air being the ruler of the physical realm. So if you come across a ghost, according to the static perspective, it's got to be a demon. Like I said, we'll go more into that in week 7, because we're going to talk about the religious perspective on ghosts, particularly that particular perspective. But for now, we won't go into that. But moving from the folk perspectives of ghosts to spiritualism, post-Enlightenment phenomenon, they're developed in an attempt to placate the increasingly encroaching sciences on metaphysics, which, when you move from the folk perspectives, from ghosts to spiritualism, when you have ghosts, these disembodied spirits, to spiritualism, spiritualists had to deal with the idea that this could not exist in a scientifically enlightened community. Just couldn't do it. Metaphysics was out. Metaphysics was out as well. So, and I think we went over this in one of the previous lectures, but it's important to note that this development, as we mentioned in like I said in an earlier lecture, the Newtonian and Einsteinian scientific paradigm left very little room in the universe for ghosts. So spiritualism had to develop some sort of paradigm, some sort of philosophy on ghosts. We were still experiencing ghosts. People were still seeing ghosts. They were still, having these otherworldly experiences, but they couldn't explain it using the more traditional and classical paradigms of a ghost, of some disembodied spirit that existed like in a dualistic universe. What they had to do was they had to assign it some sort of special place. It was a sensible, rational philosophy behind ghosts that had to be embraced. So instead of just having spooky, weird experiences, there had to be some rationalism behind the spirits. And the rationalism was the idea that, well, of course, we got into the idea of energy. We had that in one of the previous lectures, how the theory on energy as ghosts was a way to placate and to answer many of the criticisms of the ideas of ghosts from Newtonian and Einsteinian physics. This was before, obviously, before the Einsteinian perspective, but the idea was that these ghosts could exist in a universe, but they weren't in the classical way, this dualist sort of realm where ghosts exist. Rather, they were part of the natural world. So the spiritualists were attempting to naturalize ghosts. So spiritualism suggests that spirits were not static, and the condition of their demise was not conditional upon that. Rather, they were evolving, changing personalities that merely through death transcended their fleshly limitations. So it was a natural process. It wasn't supernatural. It was a natural process. The person dies, but death is merely a process of evolution. It's evolving. The enlightenment that you have achieved in life that you can no more use in the physical realm, so you had to transcend it and go on to other realms and other universes and all that sort of thing, and other levels and planes of reality. So spiritualism, unlike the static perspective, which was that you just went to heaven or hell, the spirit was constantly evolving, constantly changing. Very similar to Eastern perspectives such as Buddhism and Hinduism. But the idea was that death was a natural process, and spirits, or souls, developed outside of the physical. They kept going. So what was important about this perspective, particularly with spiritualism, what's most important for us to understand is that these spirits could communicate. They could communicate to the living to help them through their evolutionary process. So with a medium, if a medium is doing a seance or whatever they do, they communicate with the ghost or with the spirit, and the spirit relays to them information, like esoteric information, enlightened information about what they need to do to enact their own personal evolution or their own personal development and enlightenment, so that they can end up like them, and also too, so that if this person can help maybe the spirit along in their process, maybe they haven't evolved yet to where they need to be. Maybe they're in kind of a lower realm and they need to be in a higher realm or something like that. So now, if the ghosts were in a lower realm, it seems like it'd be, I guess, super physical. I don't know. I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of spiritualism because there are obviously some flaws with the theory, but the idea is that there is a quid pro quo between, well, not quid pro quo, just communication. That you have the ghosts telling the living, things about the afterlife and things like that, and how that they can, enrich their lives and be ready for that, the evolutionary process. And the living is also communicating to the deceased and telling them things that they may need to know in order to evolve in the afterlife as well. So there's this continued communication. Communication doesn't end with death. If anything, it continues. So the Enlightenment, the pinnacle of evolution, is spirit. It was captured by Hegel and the German and British idealists George Bernard Shaw and Henry Bergson in the Elan Vital, which we talked about, the Elan Vital, the spirit, earlier. But the spirit of evolution, not just as a biological process, and due to, in view of natural selection and mutations and all that stuff, but evolution as a spiritual process, as as an infinite process by which all of reality is constantly changing. Kind of like the quote from the one ancient Greek philosopher, was it Heraclitus, who said that you can't step in the same river twice. It's constantly changing. It's constantly evolving. It's getting bigger and bigger and grander and more complex and more beautiful. So this evolving, changing universe, we are part of it. And the Hegelians, the British idealists, figures like George Bernard Shaw and Henry Bergson, who felt that reality was constantly evolving and that we were evolving with it, fueled the sort of spirit of spiritualism, if you will, and increased more interest in that. Of course, as criticisms grew of spiritualism, it began to die down, as some of the things I was explaining, and more, I guess, modern perspectives on ghosts developed, like the energy theory that we were talking about. But the non-static dynamic feature of spiritualism had much to do with the influence of Eastern thought, as I had said. And the soul did not merely move to some static location, it evolved and continued upward or downward. And that's another thing too. I guess it potentially could move downward and become a lower part of reality. And so the ancient folk and spiritualist era regarded the ghost as harsh, scary, grave, unlike the fragile human. And that takes us back to the elephant and the mouse, or the idea that this is grave. So you got something that's really heavy, you got something that's really light, So you have our bodies, which are just fragile, our psyches as well, not just our bodies, but our psyche, our understanding, our perspectives. We need what Ibsen called a robust conscience. Robust conscience. And what that means is that we're able to accept harsh realities. We're able to accept truths that may be uncomfortable for us, but once we are in that in that state of being, we are able to accept them, and we're able to embrace them, as opposed to now, we can't. It just weighs us down. Here we can't. We have the weightiness, the gravity, the gravitas the gravitas of